Thanks for joining me for another episode of Bitcoin One-on-One. Today, I have the pleasure of having Steve Patterson here. Hello, Steve.
Hi there. Yeah, I thought you were saying, thanks for joining me. I was going to say, oh, yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So Steve is an independent philosopher, currently in Arizona, but you've traveled all over the world, especially New Zealand, right?
Yeah, spent some time in New Zealand. Mm-hmm.
And you've written two books. One is Square One, The Foundations of Knowledge, a philosophy book. And the other one, which I'm more familiar with, is What's the Big Deal About Bitcoin, that you wrote in 2014, early on. And I remember that book was featured by Fee. So when I was working at Fee for 4 years, that was one of the books we were promoting.
Yeah. That was a first Bitcoin book. I'm currently working on my second Bitcoin book. Hopefully we'll be done by next year. We'll see. It's taken a little bit longer than expected, but it's going to be documenting a little bit more of the history and what I think happened to Bitcoin, which isn't so good. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about that today.
So it seems that every time I see your posts on Facebook, I usually disagree with what you have to say. But I think that can be the basis of an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe you can start at the top and talk about the problems and opportunities we see with the world. And maybe I can be more specific. Ultimately, I think human beings everywhere are seeking to live their lives and achieve their goals. And I think, how can I put it? It would be great if everybody had the most opportunity to achieve their dreams. But there are a lot of impediments that people all over the world face to being successful and living prosperous lives. And I think that the major one is that governments interfere with people's ability to be successful in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
I think we agree on that general point. And one of the big ways governments interfere with people's ability to be successful is they steal people's wealth in all kinds of ways. I'll stop for a second. Any immediate thought on that?
Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, I got interested in Bitcoin way early on, just for economic reasons. I thought the idea of having competing currencies was really interesting, kind of from a theoretical level, also very important from a practical level. So I'm kind of an unabashed libertarian type, more on the extreme end of things. And I think it is urgently important that we have private monies that aren't issued by central authorities. I think that's very important for people's well-being. And I think the ability to control the money supply just gives centralized groups enormous amounts of power that always turns out to be harmful for the average person. So that was my initial attraction to Bitcoin, was really just from that interest, both in like monetary economics and also kind of the hard money libertarians' preference for decentralized market money.
So for people that believe in limiting the role of government, there's been a political libertarian movement that I once was active in, but I gave up on that because I saw that I was not achieving anything. And like you, I focused on shifting the focus to money. Do you have any thoughts on the focus on achieving limited government to political means as opposed to technological means?
Yeah, I just am totally pessimistic on the idea that you're going to reduce the size and scope and power of the system from within the system. I don't think that has a strong historical track record. I think there's all kinds of strong theoretical arguments you can give, talking about the incentives of the system to maintain itself, that suggest our hope for freedom is not going to be voting for it. I don't think that's realistic. So I'm much more optimistic in terms of technology. And in my mind, if I had to say, what is the most promising technological breakthrough that could potentially give a radical amount of freedom back to people, it'd have to be cryptocurrencies and hard money. Now, that's part of the reason I'm so bitter on what has happened to Bitcoin, because from my perspective, I've been following it for a long time now. I think Bitcoin was hijacked over a period from roughly 2014 to 2017. The boundaries are a little bit fuzzy. And it was turned into a completely different project. So Bitcoin as hard money as a currency made a lot of sense, very important. And then a bunch of academic types took it over and said, no, you see, we have to change how the system was designed, and it's going to have really high transaction fees. And there's going to be this future technology called the Lightning Network that's going to solve our problems. And I think it just ruined most of it. I think in practice, the new system that they've designed doesn't work. There are systemic problems that cannot be solved by these people. They haven't really thought them through. And so it's very frustrating as somebody who's come from it, from the libertarian angle, to say, okay, we had this incredible breakthrough, and then it was sort of run into the ground from my perspective.
So question, what problem should Bitcoin solve? So I think we agree that government being in control of money is a disaster because of inflation and because of the manipulation of the capital markets and all the destruction that creates. But what problem does Bitcoin solve?
Yeah, so I think it solves a lot of problems. One is, as you mentioned, that just the restricting government's ability to inflate the money supply is enormous, gigantic. But also there are practical benefits that are solved, like reducing the cost for exchange online. Like in the Bitcoin white paper, it talks about sort of reducing the need for the middleman with digital currency. So I think the idea of having international trade online with practically free transactions, maybe you can have sub-penny transactions for, I think that's reasonable. There's enormously just straight up economic benefit for that. Now, that the economic argument has changed a little bit since Bitcoin was released because we have better technology. So like back in 2009, credit cards were a little bit clunkier. There wasn't, PayPal was, I don't know, when PayPal started existing, but wasn't as integrated as it is now. And the other, like the payment apps on your cell phone, make online exchange a little bit easier. So that has, I feel like Bitcoin's lunch has been eaten a little bit in that respect. But still by far, the most important function that I see Bitcoin serving is originally to be a decentralized medium of exchange that could onboard the globe that can't be inflated. And I don't think, in fact, I don't think any of those promises are kept now by the new version of Bitcoin, not even the hard limit of the supply of Bitcoin. So one of the Bitcoin core developers, Peter Todd, very influential, especially in a critical, Bitcoin's adolescence from, let's say, 2013, 2016, is on the record saying, well, we might have to eventually increase the supply of coins. I know that's unpopular, but we're going to have to do that to continue paying for security because the block subsidy is going away. And if miners don't make enough money from transaction fees, well, maybe we're just going to have to increase the block reward indefinitely so that we don't actually have a hard limit of 21 million. So I think that's totally possible. That's a social phenomenon, whether or not that actually happens. And I am very, very sad because if Bitcoin has really expensive transactions, you can't use it in commerce. And if it's controlled by a small group of people, we might not have the 21 million limit, 100 years from now.
So Bitcoin serves many functions, and I would let's look at two different functions. One is global reserve currency, the store of value. Another function is the medium of exchange. So here in the US, we have so many different payment apps that are basically cheap or free and quite effective and have low friction. So we have Venmo and PayPal and many other services. As a medium of exchange, Bitcoin is not competitive.
Why is that? Why wouldn't it be competitive? You can have cheaper transactions with on-chain transactions.
Because cost is not an issue at all for
what do you
transactions.
Mean cost isn't an issue? You
I mean, Venmo is free.
No,
Venmo is free.
Okay,
right?
Not everybody is onboarded to Venmo.
Well,
and then you have problems accessing your money. You have to make sure PayPal doesn't deplatform you or Venmo doesn't deplatform you. Bitcoin is the best online payment technology we have, a big block Bitcoin, and the original design of Bitcoin.
Let me back up. So we have different purposes. Let's just say if Bitcoin was the global reserve currency, if it was only in big banks and was never used for peer-to-peer commerce, it still solves the key problem of inflation.
Incorrect, 100% incorrect. Let me tell you why. So if you listen to the people who have redesigned Bitcoin, they say, oh, it's going to be central banks are going to own it. Okay, they're talking about issuing tokens that are supposed to be backed by Bitcoin that's held by central banks. So if you have central banks that are issuing tokens, that is not going to, it doesn't have to have the peg to Bitcoin. This is already the case. You have for example, Blockstream, which was the company that effectively took over Bitcoin development. They are now marketing their liquid network as an alternative to the Bitcoin blockchain, and they are issuing their own tokens and other companies' tokens on the liquid network, which, by the way, they get
pegged tokens.
They're not pegged. They're pegged if you trust Blockstream. So the way that the liquid network works is it has a group of 15 hand-selected companies from Blockstream that are, I forget what they call them, like the guardians of the network. If 10 of those 15 decide to steal your money, poof, your money's gone. The network security totally collapses.
But it is all public.
So
Yes.
what? It's public. You're trusting 15 hand-selected companies from one group.
You're trusting them not to steal your money.
You're going to tell me that given the stakes and the power involved, those 15 people are going to be honest. They're going to make sure that there's a one-to-one backing of their tokens to BTC tokens. I don't think so.
So there's the ideal, in which case Bitcoin is the single layer that provides the global store of value and peer-to-peer currency. Okay. But there is the technical reality that is impossible.
Incorrect.
Physically impossible.
Let's dive in. What do you mean why would that be the case? I'm sorry. Forgive me for being frank. That's not close to being true. These calculations have been run for like a decade now. And you could have reasonably, 600 meg blocks, let's say 1 gig blocks, relatively small blocks considering major technology that can onboard the world. You can run the calculations. You can actually have global money.
Let's just start this from the basics, and maybe people are listening that are familiar with it. So every transaction uses some data, right? So if I pay you money, that requires some data. Let's say it's 100 bytes, or 100 bytes. And if people are transacting every second, some quantity of transactions are being put on a single blockchain, single immutable blockchain. And so for a given throughput of transactions, it must generate some quantity of data. There's no way to get around that, right? It's just math.
That part is correct, yes.
Okay, as long as you have one.
Require data, yes.
And so that data must all be stored in one database. That's how the blockchain works. It's one database.
It depends on what you mean by one database. So there's a few points we have to make here. You don't have to keep the UTXO set history forever. Miners already prune the blockchain. So if you have a transaction that was made in 2010, you don't have to keep that. Miners don't keep that.
Somebody has to keep it.
No, you actually, not from a technical standpoint, you don't. You can have.
So if you hold on, if you have Bitcoin that you purchased in 2010 and that you've never moved it since,
sure.
In order for you to claim it, you must.
I said the history of the UTXO. So if it's an active UTXO, a UTXO by definition hasn't been spent, right?
All right.
So I'm talking about the history of transactions.
Okay. So
sure.
So now you're saying that there's some archival nodes that have a full history.
They can, sure.
Okay. So you must have some nodes that have.
I do want to make one technical point.
Yeah.
In order for Bitcoin to function correctly, you don't have to have any archival nodes. So you could, in theory, this is never going to happen because there's no reason to do it because the expenses aren't actually that great. You could, in theory, have miners sync up to the UTXO set, and they're updating the UTXO set, and that's the only thing that needs to be maintained. And if the transactions just got too numerous, you could have it all pruned out of the blockchain.
Let's differentiate two things. The UTXOs are, and I want to not get too technical because people are listening that don't understand. UTXOs are unspent Bitcoin transactions. That's not the blockchain. The blockchain is a much larger database that has all the hashes the miners produce. And in order to verify that you in fact own some Bitcoin, you have to basically follow the chain of signatures all the way to the beginning.
No, not yourself, not your own personal Bitcoin. So this is one of these myths that has just not died. You can verify your own transactions are inside the blockchain without having to have a full node. You don't have to have the whole entire blockchain. You can't verify other people's transactions, but you can absolutely 100% verify the legitimacy of your personal transactions through SPV, which is how Satoshi originally designed Bitcoin. And there are multiple clients now that use well, some of them actually use the full SPV, but for a long time they used something approximating SPV that allowed individuals to verify their own transactions without having a copy of the entire
individuals, blockchain. But any service operator or merchant
if you want to verify somebody else's transactions, then you need the copy of the blockchain. Yeah.
So for a Bitcoin economy, that there must be a lot of full nodes that are able to verify transactions.
No, absolutely not. There doesn't need to be a lot. There only needs to be there needs to be exactly as many as need a copy of the ledger of everybody's transactions. How many is that? I don't think that needs to be too many.
There need to be enough so that no entity can easily obtain a majority of the hashing power.
Okay, I'm sorry. We have to differentiate hashing power from nodes. So Bitcoin is secured by there not being a 51% attack in terms of hash rate. This is totally disconnected from full nodes. Nodes do not secure the network in any way whatsoever. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there's two things that are needed. One is for merchants, not individuals, that provide services to run a full node.
No.
And two.
Why would they need to do that? If you're a merchant accepting Bitcoin, you don't need to. No, you don't. That's not the case. If you're accepting Bitcoin transaction ever,
you want to verify that that person owns.
You have a payment processor. That's how the businesses have worked pretty much from the beginning.
Fine.
Well, why in the world would you need to run your own node when you can outsource that to somebody? Yeah, sure. Of course.
Well, hold on. I thought the whole point of Bitcoin was that we don't need payment processors, that you can broadcast your own transactions network.
You can broadcast your own transactions. You can send and receive payments without payment processors. That's fine. If you're talking about,
but you want to verify that somebody owns the Bitcoin.
Your own transactions. You do not.
If somebody sends you Bitcoin, shouldn't you verify that they own the Bitcoin?
So if somebody sends you Bitcoin, that means you have the UTXO. You have the information necessary to verify that transaction is valid. If you want to verify some other party sent Bitcoin to some other third party and you're not a part of it, then you need the blockchain. But
how can you?
Most businesses don't need to do that.
How can you, as a business? Well, let me disagree with something you said. You can have merchant services for Bitcoin, but I think that Bitcoin merchants should run a full node. That's part of the vision of Bitcoin.
Why in the world? Wait, I'm sorry. That is a new idea. That was never, ever the original idea. Satoshi was crystal clear. In multiple occasions, he did not design Bitcoin so that regular people had to run their own nodes. That doesn't make any sense. I mean regular
people. I'm talking about merchants.
Okay, merchants as well don't. Unless you're a cryptocurrency exchange, that you're going to have to run your own node pretty much without exception. You can have 1,000,001. It's like saying businesses need to only accept physical cash. No, of course not. You have PayPal. You have a bajillion different options.
But the idea is that you should not have central entity like Square.
No, that has never been the idea. Where in the world did this idea come from? Do you know where this idea came from?
I mean, I think it's bad. So Square for dollars processes, let's say, half the payments out there. If now Square is in the Bitcoin and people just trust Square, like most merchants just trust them, that the chain is what it is, it's centralized again. That is bad.
So we'll have to come back to that because the terrible ideas that are in BTC right now actually are going to require centralized companies in a much more fundamental way than if we had on-chain transactions. So we'll have to come back to this idea of centralization because you're gonna end up contradicting yourself. But I do want to respond to this idea.
Yeah.
It is not feasible by any stretch of the imagination to think that the person that is going to repair my car down the street is going to be running his own Bitcoin nodes, that he can make sure for some reason he's not going to outsource this, that he's going to have to personally run a Bitcoin node. That is totally disconnected from reality. That is never going to be the world that we live in. Never. It's a complicated thing. It requires technical knowledge. Nobody's going to do it.
Because the technology is in its infancy. You have boxes now. You just turn it on.
Why would they do that?
It syncs.
Do you realistically think, David, that people are going to choose ideologically, regular people are going to choose to run their own Bitcoin node when they can just have a payment processor?
If you have a credit card terminal, there's no ideology about it. If you want to accept credit cards, you have a credit card terminal. It's a relatively foolproof device that just accepts payments, right? If you have another device, which is like credit cards, but it's labeled Bitcoin, you don't have to know how it works. You just turn on and it works.
Okay, so credit card terminals are connected to payment processors, right? If you're gonna get a
Yes.
credit card terminal, you have to call up
Right now they
Amex
are,
and
yeah.
Visa. Yeah. So if it's not reasonable to think that they're going to have full payment like credit card processing software back end for themselves, it always goes through companies. And furthermore, the actual risks of accepting Bitcoin without a full note are marginal for lots of reasons. The real world risks are marginal. Somebody isn't going to walk into your property, execute a double spend on you. You've got footage of them. That's like, the risks are infinitesimal in the real world.
So you agree that
unless you're a cryptocurrency exchange.
Right now, there's not a lot of value to businesses point of sale accepting Bitcoin.
Okay, it depends on what you mean by Bitcoin. So right now, the terrible network that's been ruined by a bunch of eggheads, I think it creates negative value to accept it. It's a headache, because then you have
or any crypto, whatever, Bitcoin Cash. There's no benefit to not using dollars for a point of sale.
That's not quite true. We can come up with examples where the costs are actually lower. Like for micropayments, for example, Bitcoin, the original Bitcoin technology is still the best technology in the world for micropayments. People don't realize that yet, but you can have subsequent transactions that have all the wonderful properties of Bitcoin right now. It already exists. So there are some use cases in which it makes more sense. But way
nobody's
that the system,
doing that. Like there's Bitcoin Cash is around, but nobody's that uses that.
Yeah, BSV is another big block Bitcoin that is using micropayments all the time. I mean,
it's technically
20.
possible, but realistically, nobody's using that.
I'm sorry, where do you get this idea? Are you following the BSV economy very closely? I use it every day. I make 20 BSV transactions a day. The bunch of apps that I use that are using the blockchain in an interesting way.
Give me
social
some
media,
examples.
for social media posts are on Bitcoin. There's an interesting, clever betting app for NFL games that is using micropayments. There are people using it in like
my
100
understanding is
different
that projects are using BSV to create an excuse to use it as opposed to being legitimate.
That's not true at all. That you've heard this through the grapevine. Please investigate this yourself. It's not
in
true.
the real world. I just have not come across a business that says, "Hey, we accept."
What do you mean in the real world?
BSV?
So you mean in the real world, people aren't accepting sub-cent transactions? That's surprising. Yeah, I go to the gas station, I can't pay for a sub-cent transaction. Okay, you got me there.
I'm just saying I
for
don't
the
come
internet,
across,
which is what Bitcoin was designed for. People are using it for micropayments right now.
Let's get back to something else. So I want to talk about fundamentals.
Okay. Yes, good.
Given a certain throughput, you must generate a certain amount of data. There's no way around that. Okay.
Yep.
So if the Visa network, I forget the number, processes like 60 million transactions per day, probably bigger, but let's just say.
Sure.
So it's just the basic mathematics that would generate so much data that nobody could run.
How much data?
Terabytes
Have you
per
looked
day.
at this at all, David? It's
Yes.
600 megabytes per 10 minutes.
What volume?
It's trivial for massive scale. Massive scale. I can get the numbers for you right now. It's 600 megabyte blocks, and you get like, I think it's at least 100. Let's see, what is it? It's 100, 205. I don't know. 500 transactions per second.
Visa does 150 million transactions per day.
Okay, do the calculations. We can figure it out. The numbers are embarrassingly low. They were 600 megabytes for something like a rough global scale in 2014, and that's nothing. That's 600 megabytes every 10 minutes. It's a laughably trivial amount of data. People are streaming onto their phone way more data than would be required to process a massive amount of transactions on Bitcoin.
So 150 million transactions per day times how much is a typical transaction? 100.
I don't know. We have to look at it. It's really not.
If it's 100 kilobytes,
it's not 100 kilobytes for a transaction. That would mean you could have 10. You could have 10 Bitcoin transactions per block, because it's roughly a megabyte.
You're right. It's 100 bytes. Okay, divided by 1024 bytes to kilobytes, divided by 1024 kilobytes to a megabyte equals 1.4 gigabytes per day.
Okay, per day? Divide that. Okay, how many blocks? So let's see. Divided by 24 per hour, and divided by 6. And what do you?
So hold on. So per year, that's half a gigabyte.
Sorry, per day. You said it was
per year. That's half a terabyte. It's 1.4 gigabytes per day.
Okay, so 1.4 per day. So divide that by 24, which is per hour, and then divide that by 6, which is per block.
Forget block sizes for a minute. Let's
No,
talk
no, no,
about
no,
the
no. Let's see what's the number there. What'd you come up with?
1.4 gigabytes per day divided by 24 hours divided by 6.
Uh-huh.
So that's 0.001. Hold on. That's 0.001. What unit are we? Gigabytes. That's 10 megabyte blocks.
Yeah, that certainly doesn't work out.
I'm sorry.
It's something like it's something like 600 megabytes for
1.4
reasonable. Yeah.
1.4 gigabyte per day divided by 24 hours divided by 6 blocks per hour equals 0.01 gigabyte. So times 1024 equals
How much?
10 megabyte blocks. Is that what I'm saying?
So that can't be right. Again, I don't exactly want to know what the exact numbers are. I'm just telling you, I've done this calculation multiple times. It's somewhere from 600 megabytes to 1.5 gigs
But
for massive scale.
Here's my point.
Multiple transactions per day per person.
Okay.
Okay. Now
the point is per year. That's half a terabyte per year.
Right? Okay. Two things, David. Half a terabyte per year. That is a tiny amount of, that's a ridiculously small amount of information. That's nothing, okay, per year. That's not the right amount. It's actually more than that, but let's just go with that number. And again, you can prune the blockchain. You're talking about the way you've just framed it, let's say it's a terabyte per year. That means you can have a drive with 32 megs on it, and you can buy one of those drives every 32 years and put the entire Bitcoin blockchain on it. That's processing the world's transactions.
A drive with 32 terabytes, you mean?
32 terabytes. Sorry, I don't know what I said. 32 terabytes.
So, so if it is, I think my numbers are too small.
I'm sure that they're wrong. Yeah.
But let's say 1 terabyte per year. So 10 years, 10 terabytes.
Huh?
So
You're a tech guy. Does that seem like a lot? I'm sorry. What were you saying? What about
it is above the ability of consumers to run a full node at that size.
Okay. Do you believe that, David? Okay. That sounds like you just read the Bitcoin Standard. You're a tech guy. Do you seriously believe that people could not handle 10 terabytes of data per year?
A normal desktop computer cannot handle that.
You don't. Okay. That is crazy false. Have you looked at the numbers? 10 terabytes of, is it the bandwidth? Is it the storage? What are you talking about? 10 terabytes? That's nothing.
It is not nothing because it will keep going up. And this is how many Visa transactions do people make per day? Somebody makes 2 or 3 transactions per day. I mean, this is just one network. Visa is just one network, right? There's many of them. So realistically, if people were using this for micropayments, and this was the global payment network, it'd be much larger.
I'm sorry, David.
I mean, your
that is ridiculous.
It's more than anybody
that is self-evidently incorrect. Go to Amazon. What are you talking about? That's not.
Yes, if you buy specialized hardware, the point is
specialized hardware that costs $500.
It's more than 500. It would cost
$1,000. Oh my goodness, $1,000 to get a computer that can process the world's transactions.
All right,
can you imagine?
So we're talking about just for the first decade of Bitcoin, you now have to buy special hardware. Normal desktop computers can run it, right? You have $1,000 entry point at least.
So let's say you have 1,000. Okay, now, to be fair, this is underestimated. I think it's more than that, but we'll go with your numbers right now. Okay, $1,000 where you could have regular people who have no reason on planet Earth to run a full node and verify the world's transactions have that ability. And this technology was stunted so that we could have 1 megabyte blocks and build second layers. That doesn't make a lot of sense, David.
What is the issue with second layers?
They don't work right now. There is no reasonable substitution or anything that comes close to being a reasonable substitution for on-chain transactions.
So what is the problem with second layers, which allow basically infinite scalability? I just
articulated them. So
you said it doesn't work, but how does it not work?
Right now, so for example, the Lightning Network requires on-chain transactions in order to work. You have to make an on-chain transaction to open up a Lightning channel and to close a Lightning channel. And it's recommended you make multiple channel payments per year. Okay, that is a system breaker if you have a network which costs $1,000 plus to make an on-chain transaction.
Except it costs about 20 cents right now.
Right now. And why is that the case? Is that the reason it costs 20 cents, David, is because people aren't using the network, right? It's if you were to have the blocks full, which they've been, you can have easily $1,000 transactions. It's already in the blockchain. Search the blockchain for $1,000 transaction fees. You'll find like thousands. Okay.
Okay, so right now it's an equilibrium of volume and fees. It's always an equilibrium, right?
So if enough people try to use BTC right now, it's not very money either because the blocks are tiny. The fees skyrocket as they have multiple times already. And if that's the case, you cannot open a Lightning channel or close the Lightning channel without making an on-chain transaction. Now, these dummies that restructured the entire Bitcoin model think they have no proposed resolution for how we're going to deal with $1,000 transaction fees, which they think it should be $1,000 plus to play for security, plus Lightning Network, which requires on-chain transactions to make. They have zero proposed resolution to this.
Okay, I don't get this. Okay, so right now the equilibrium fee is 20 cents, right? That is
Okay.
if the fee was lower, there'd be more transactions. If the fee was higher, there'd be fewer transactions. There's always an equilibrium. The more expensive Bitcoin gets with the current system.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
that's not the reason. So that's not how it works. The way that it works is as when blocks become full, fees skyrocket because there is a finite amount of space because of the way they redesigned this system. There's a finite amount of space. And let's say it's, 7,000 transactions, whatever. As soon as it's 7,001, now the person trying to make a transaction is bidding against all of the other people who are trying to get into the block.
Are the blocks full right now or not?
I don't think they're full right now. No, I would be shocked if they're full and you can make a 20-cent transaction. That's never happened.
Why aren't blocks full right now?
Because people aren't using the network. There's 10,000 other cryptocurrencies that probably 100,000 at this point. Why would you use a system that is orders of magnitude more expensive than other cryptocurrencies?
Except no other cryptocurrency is being used for commerce to a significant extent.
That's not true. Where did you get that idea? Are you aware that BitPay puts out statistics for saying how much different currencies are used in
so
commerce?
How much are they
already used? I don't know. You can check their website. You figure it out at BitPay. And also, these are talking points. And I should say furthermore, because I was around in the early days, Bitcoin was being used in commerce a lot. And then we experienced for the first time anti-adoption when the blocks became full. Steam was using it. It was being used to, Microsoft was using it. And then they all said, we're actually not going to accept it anymore. Why? Because the fees are too full and the transactions are unreliable and people have a terrible user experience. So it used to be the case people wanted to use it and then these dummies broke the system and now people aren't using it.
Okay, I'm looking at the BitPay report. Bitcoin is the most used crypto. It has 55.4% of payments.
And how much? What's the number? What's the number of volume per month or whatever?
Well, BitPay only has their numbers, which is 66,000 per month.
66,000 what?
Transactions per month.
What's the dollar amount?
They do not list the dollar amount.
Okay, well, they used to. It was, I don't know, $1 billion a year or something like that.
Here's my point. Bitcoin is by far the most popular currency. Number two is Bitcoin Cash with 10%.
Okay.
So Bitcoin Cash is essentially free transactions, still has 10%. The point is there's not demand for cheap transactions right now.
First of all, that's not correct. There was massive demand. And we have there is so much nonsense in the cryptocurrency sphere. People have no idea what to use this technology for. It is not surprising. It's actually surprising me that it would be 10%. Okay. People are so terribly confused. They think this is a thing you buy, you hold, and you retire on, which doesn't make any sense. Okay. So it was being used in commerce. I remember the press release when BitPay processed their first billion, they had their first $1 billion year in terms of transactions processed. If that's been reduced, well, I have a bunch of people I can name in person that have perpetuated this ridiculous narrative so people don't know what the heck cryptocurrency can be used for anymore. But it absolutely has a value.
So your position is the market is wrong, people just ignorant? about
I would say the
opportunity
market
of cheap
is,
transactions?
yeah. So like Litecoin doesn't have any real value. Dogecoin was literally created as a joke. Shibu coin, whatever, Shiba Inu coin was a meme of a meme. Yeah, the market is ridiculously irrational right now. And I should say, with all due respect, there are a lot of people who position themselves as experts in this sphere and don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't know. They don't know the basics. They haven't worked. They read that stupid Bitcoin standard book, which says at the end that well, it would be impossible to build make world transactions with this technology. Fabricated lie out of whole cloth. Go back. So this is the subject of the book I'm working on right now. This is all myth and nonsense. The system scales perfectly well. It's an incredible invention, and it was taken over by people who created a narrative that has still stuck.
So your position is that it is entirely possible to have these 100 terabyte blockchain because very few people actually need to run it.
What do you mean 100? Okay, so yes,
I mean, eventually,
great question. Great question.
If we use it for micropayments, it will be that.
Great question. So my claim is that the original Bitcoin technology can scale to world level without any problems whatsoever. It was designed so that, in Satoshi's words, this is almost verbatim, the network would centralize into big data centers, big server farms, I think was the term that he used, for miners. As it should be. There's a specialized industry for mining. They can handle massively big blocks. It can scale just fine. There's absolutely no technological reason why it couldn't scale just fine. And again, there's pruning, so you don't actually have to keep the records indefinitely. There's all kinds of reasons why it's not an issue. And I should say that like Bitcoin Cash has already put out 32 meg blocks. BSV's put out over gig blocks.
Which was nothing because the blocks are not full.
What do you mean the blocks aren't? What do you mean the blocks aren't full?
Bitcoin Cash allows 32 meg blocks, but those blocks are not full of transactions. Actually, there's very few transactions.
Where do you get this idea, David? Look at the blockchain. I tell you what. Go to what is it? Blockchair. Go to the BSV blockchain and tell me just search for really big blocks and tell me how many transactions you find that are really big blocks.
So every now and then, the Bitcoin Cash network does a throughput test.
It's more than 1 million. There are multiple blocks on the BSV network that have processed more than 1 million transactions in a single block.
So again, every now and then they do a throughput test where for a short period of time.
How do you know it's a throughput test? Are you aware that CryptoFights was a company that was using the BSV blockchain for little micropayments? It's like a little RPG phone app. And they were making it so that you were using the blockchain to put data in. It was generating a massive amount of transactions.
All right. So I agree that it is possible to have 32 megabyte blocks. Of course, to have Visa-like throughput, you need much larger than 32 megabytes.
Okay. I'm sorry. First of all, that claim's incorrect. So so it depends on what year you're talking about Visa. So you really don't need to have very large blocks to have massive throughput. We're already 32 meg blocks is already, I think, at the PayPal level. That's like 100 transactions per second, something like that. So BCH can already process 100 transactions per second for doing essentially a trivial block size limit upgrade that was being discussed back in 2011, going to 32 meg blocks.
Okay, so why is the Bitcoin community so opposed to large blocks?
Because they've been propagandized for a very long time. It's the subject of the book that I'm writing. There is so much nonsense and misinformation. It is staggering. People do not understand the basics. So I could say, why do people believe weird narratives surrounding COVID? Why do people have weird religious narratives that they believe? It's the exact same reason. There are some authority figures that were either co-opted or they were fooled accidentally, and they keep repeating nonsense over and over and over, and it's stuck.
So your position is that the argument that the network cannot technically handle that transaction volume is false.
Okay. If the claim is that it cannot technically handle the transaction volume, I'm 100% certain that's false. That's just a brazen lie. Now, if you want to make the more nuanced claim that it's not good because it centralizes the network, we can have that discussion. I would love to have that discussion. But as a pure technical claim, it is 100% a fabrication of whole cloth lie, not true at all.
Okay, so let me try to summarize. There's two visions. One, the Bitcoin vision is, the Bitcoin core vision, as you would call it, is that anybody can run a Bitcoin node, and there's only, I don't know, 300 transactions per second. I forget the number.
It's 3 to 7 transactions per second right now.
Okay.
Yep. And look it up if you think I'm wrong. It's 3 to 7 transactions per second on this new technology.
You're right. Yeah. I misspoke. And the way you scale is using a second layer network. And your vision is that there's only a few large full Bitcoin nodes, and everyone else just only has the UTXO set for their wallet. And they basically
They
trust.
don't even have the UTXO set. You don't need the whole UTXO set. So that's the way SPV was designed, is you need a small amount of information. That's the way Merkle trees work. You don't need to walk around with the thing going back to 2010. That's not how.
Which allows you to verify your transactions only,
Yes.
not anyone else's.
Yes. Now I would also, we have to be careful, only a few nodes. Well, how many payment processors are there going to be? How many companies actually are going to need to run their own node? I don't know. Might be in the thousands. I don't know how many nodes they're going to be.
Well,
What I can say with
right now we have
confidence is,
Square that has, like, I don't know, 50% or more market share of online payments. Is that okay to happen with Bitcoin, where let's say Square goes into Bitcoin and
So, but
only
there
they have
isn't
the
a-
full node?
that isn't the, so nodes don't process payments. The miners are processing the payments. So yeah, if you're talking about, that doesn't even make sense. Market share of nodes. The nodes aren't doing anything other than verifying other people's transactions. They don't secure the network. They don't produce blocks. It would be a problem if we had some minor centralization of more than 50%. Yep, 100% agree, but that's a totally separate concern.
But presumably payment provider and miner centralization go hand in hand. If Bitcoin becomes mainstream,
No,
who has the
why
incentives
would
on
you
miners?
think that a payment processor would be a miner? The miners are in the business of burning electricity so they can create blocks. Payment processors are in the business of merchant services. These are two completely separate industries. I do not foresee a future in which miners and BitPay become one and the same. I don't foresee that at all.
So who will do the mining?
Miners do the mining.
But I mean, yes, but would it be large electric utilities?
I mean, who does the mining right now?
Right now, it's a very edge case activity. So very few, or
edge case activity. Bitmain was one of the most profitable companies in the world. They just invested like $100 million.
Yeah, but 100 million is still trivial. Like no large energy company. So here's who I think should be run mining. If Bitcoin is mainstream.
There's no should in this. There's no should run mine. Who should?
Would
entrepreneurs? There's no should or would.
In an equilibrium situation,
which never exists in reality. There's an equilibrium is never reached. So in reality, entrepreneurs will be mining, and I don't really care who they are.
Here's my point. I think large energy producers are the ones that have the best efficiencies of scale to become miners.
Okay. Let's say that's the case. Let's play out that scenario.
So what I think is bad is if only a few entities do the mining, then they can collaborate.
And how do small blocks? How do small blocks prevent that?
Allows anybody to easily buy a miner and join the network.
Okay, that doesn't make sense. Okay, nodes, not full mining nodes, and non-mining nodes are two different things. Now, it is more expensive, yes, for a miner to be processing big blocks, 100%. But you're talking about companies that are billion-dollar companies, and you're talking about how many terabytes per year? Okay, the cost of running a node to a miner versus the cost of electricity are like, I don't know how many orders of magnitude different that is, but if you're going to be a relevant player in Bitcoin mining, you can handle a couple extra terabytes every year.
Or if it is used for micropayments, it will soon get into the petabytes.
So it might be the case that at scale, we have the Bitcoin blockchain being, or a blockchain, I don't know, it depends on what you mean by Bitcoin anymore, being used for micropayments in which you have huge transaction throughput. Yes, and if that's the case, then big miners are going to be taking a lot of bandwidth. That's the case too. It
will not be accessible for anybody to just buy a miner and start mining.
Okay.
You'll need a petabyte storage array.
Sorry, are you making the claim, David, that right now the security of the Bitcoin network is improved because anybody can buy their own miner?
Maybe not one miner, but it is improved by the ease to entry into the space.
And the ease to entry is meaningfully different based on the block size limit and how many so we're
if it was a petabyte, it would be a major barrier.
I think actually, if you were to run the numbers, you could have big companies that are going to be able to handle petabytes. And also, if we're at that level of scale, what are the electricity costs going to be? If you had Bitcoin as it was originally designed and it takes over the world as it should have, which it won't because it's been stunted by having small blocks, the cost for mining are going to go through the roof for electricity costs. That's the vast majority of the expenses that the miners have, which is why the biggest miners in the world are supportive of big blocks. Of course, they're already spending unbelievable amounts of infrastructure money. So they want to be able to process more transactions. Obviously, the security of the Bitcoin network is like 8 years removed from a regular person being able to pick up a Bitcoin miner and have any relevant impact on the network whatsoever.
All right, so miners do hold the power in the Bitcoin network, right? So because ultimately it's their hash power vote that determines whether things are adopted. So
maybe that's an interesting discussion we should talk about. That's an interesting claim.
The question is, why haven't they voted for big blocks? Because they haven't.
Yeah, well, they have. That's what Bitcoin Cash was. So Bitmain created Bitcoin Cash as a backup because they thought, well, what if these Bitcoin Core pieces of crap that have lied so many times to us decide not to follow through with SegWit 2x as they promised they would? They said, well, just in case, let's have this backup Bitcoin Cash.
And the backup failed because there's no market support for it.
That's not true. What do you mean there's no market support for it?
Well,
what are you talking about? The 80% of the network, 80% of the network of the biggest economic players were all in support. All of the major economic players were in support, including the miners for SegWit 2x. All of them. The biggest players were in support. That is, so the reason it didn't
but ultimately it failed, didn't it?
It did. That's a fascinating question. Why did it fail? We can have a long conversation on this. So this is also a subject of the book that I'm working on. One of the reasons that can't be discounted if you actually talk to the entrepreneurs in the space is that they were being attacked by small blockers. That, like, for example, a myriad of ways. So one of them Roger Ver talks about is he would have his company was getting email bombs. So like a Bitcoin.com, all of their email addresses were being bombed by 1,000, 10,000 emails per day by people that were upset at them. When Bitcoin XT was founded, this was before SegWit 2x, there was DDoS attacks on XT nodes. There was a list that the Bitcoin core crazies put out, the enemies of Bitcoin list, on which there was Coinbase.
There were DDoS attacks on Bitcoin as well.
All of the relevant economic players were put on the big hit list, the Bitcoin core hit list. They had social media engineering campaigns where they said, "Oh no." So, for example, I know some entrepreneurs very well who are still in the crypto space, and they supported SegWit 2x, and they said, honestly, our company had serious problems, still had ongoing serious problems, and failed in part because our reputation was attacked by the core crazies for supporting SegWit 2x. There was attack dogs everywhere. The censorship was rampant, and they bullied people into submission. That's what happened. That's one of the many things that happened.
It was a debate. I mean, you're not very compelling. We say people emailed spam to force them to go against big blocks.
So let's keep talking about it then. Okay, so some of the other things you could expect if you were supported SegWit 2x was you would have waves of fake reviews on your apps, and they would say, "Oh my gosh!" For example, I was connected with some people at BitPay. They had this big problem where they would get reviews on their wallets. They would say, "Oh my gosh, this is a scam wallet. I'm going to lose my money because it's not going to connect to the Bitcoin network anymore." And by that, of course, they meant the BTC 1 megabyte network and not BTC SegWit 2x network.
I mean, I think this is a little ingenious. There were very hot feelings on both sides. There was dust attacks on Bitcoin for some time because people wanted to prove that it never cannot scale.
Okay. So I don't know what you mean by a dust attack. We'll have to talk about that. But let's say there was a dust attack. A dust attack out there, what that means is a lot of transactions were made.
Fake transactions.
Okay, do you think doesn't matter? Fake transactions. What does that matter? Who does that affect versus having your company flooded by fake reviews online? So some of these people getting death threats. Like, how is this thing proportional at all?
You're just not convincing me that because of all these things, miners decided to act against their long-term self-interest.
That's not the only reason. So miners cannot act totally separately from the rest of the industry. If you're talking about miners versus the companies versus the exchanges, it's a complex network here. So something else that happened is, for example, I think it was Bitfinex claimed that no matter what happened with SegWit 2x, they were going to keep the 1 megabyte chain labeled BTC on their platform, BTC on the platform. So even if there was a majority miners that decided to upgrade to SegWit 2x, they were not going to recognize it. Now imagine
brinksmanship is very common in any debate.
Imagine that you're a miner trying to make a decision: am I going to upgrade to SegWit 2x or not? And now you say one of the biggest exchanges in the world is going to throw a huge wrench in the market by saying, well, they're not going to go with what the miners do. So suddenly you go, okay, well, the easier option is just not to do anything. We can't do this. This is going to cause a bunch of turmoil. That's just one of the other many things that have happened. For example, like you can, another thing Mike Hearn speculated about. Mike Hearn, I think, is probably the best mind that has ever been in cryptocurrency. He said culture had was a factor here. He said the Chinese miners absolutely did not want to be perceived as bucking authority. He said maybe it's because they're Chinese. Whose authority? And that's the authority of the Bitcoin core developers that presented themselves as the authorities of the system. Now, not only theoretically, not only online, but if I have heard now from multiple people who have inside information on this, that when Bitcoin Core when Blockstream was trying to raise money from venture capital, they went around and pitched themselves by saying, we control Bitcoin. Apparently there's a pitch deck floating out there that they were pitching to VC saying, yeah, we control Bitcoin. So they obviously presented themselves as the authorities in Bitcoin, and the miners, despite wanting big blocks and had said so for years, did not want to break rank. This is what Mike Hearn speculated about, and evidence suggests that's the case. And like there are still some big miners out there that have sort of talked about this, and they the whole split is in the back of their mind for them right now. But it does seem like they did not want to rock the boat and dissent from those that presented themselves as the authorities, the Bitcoin core developers and Blockstream, effectively.
So here we are 4 years later, and miners are still behind Bitcoin and not.
What do you mean they're behind Bitcoin?
I mean, they're mining and still behind.
Yeah, of
Bitcoin,
course,
not Bitcoin Cash.
That's okay. So the reason that there are a lot of miners mining Bitcoin is not for ideological reasons. It's because that's where there's money to be made, obviously. So in terms of their ideology, there are still quite a lot of old school big miners, Jihan and others, who are behind Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV. There's a pretty big support in the Chinese community for BSV.
So your position is that the reason that Bitcoin won the block size debate is because there's this ideology that the core team perpetuated that basically got a majority of the community on board, and they bullied the rest of the compliance.
They definitely did not get the majority of the community on board originally. So the overwhelming majority, economic majority, the online majority was big blockers. And it had been that way until probably, I want to say 2016, probably as late as 2016. I mean, keep in mind, people like Adam Back were talking about, Bitcoin upgrades 2 megabytes, then 4 megabytes, then up 8 megabytes back in, 2013, 2012, something like that. Like there was effectively nobody who had the position of the crazy rabid small blockers today. There was like nobody that I can think of. Even people like Greg Maxwell, crazy as he is, was not a 1 megabyte forever crazy person. In fact, there was
nobody says has to be 1 megabyte forever. Just to be clear.
Okay, well, not 1 megabyte by now. like if you think you're a tech guy, right? If you're trying to talk about realistically the size of the blocks, it's comical how small the blocks are right now. 1 megabyte every 10 a megabyte. That is a fraction of a picture on everybody's cell phone every 10 minutes.
The idea is that we force the blocks to be small. We keep them small to force the second layer technology to evolve, right?
Okay, so
nobody disagrees with that part.
A few thoughts on that. Well, I wouldn't say things so confidently, like that nobody disagrees. So go back in the forums,
Let me clarify. The point is not that we need 1 megabyte blocks forever. The point is, let's keep them small so that second layer solutions evolve, right?
Okay. So I want to talk about central planning for a minute. So think how crazy this is, right? Satoshi Nakamoto designed a system that did not have inherent scaling limitations. He said himself verbatim, it never really hits a scale ceiling. That's a verbatim quote from him. Okay, so he thought, yeah, it's you can have big blocks. That's how the system's done. Great. So some other developers with a very different philosophy came in some years later, and they said, we don't like that. We think, in fact, there should be full blocks. And instead of having effectively free transactions, we should have $1,000 transactions. And we should have second layers. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Okay. And it just so happened that these people, yeah, all kinds of interesting little conspiracy theories I could throw out here that have legs, but we don't have to go
A
down that road.
minority of them work for one company.
Yeah, that was the case. That might not be the case now, but yes, the majority of them worked for one company, employed at a very critical time in Bitcoin's history. Okay, so they say, you know, we have a totally different redesign that's literally the exact opposite. Instead of free and instant global transactions, people don't need to run their own nodes, obviously. You have everybody should run their own node, and there should only be 7 transactions per second, and you should pay $1,000 per transaction or plus, or maybe more than $1,000. And yeah, that makes sense. And then they say, you know, part of the reason we have to have small blocks is so that we can incentivize the other developers to work on second layer solutions.
Which worked, by the way.
What do you mean it worked? Where's the great effective second layer solution? It worked in terms of fracturing the Bitcoin economy into 10,000 different pieces.
Well, it worked in the sense that I just purchased a book with Lightning Network, and it was basically free. And it was pretty mature.
Let's talk about the Lightning Network then. Let's talk about how great this second layer technology is. Okay, so first of all, are we in agreement that you have to make multiple on-chain transactions in order to use the Lightning Network?
Sure.
Okay, so if we were to have the situation in which there are $1,000 transaction fees or more on the main Bitcoin network, how is that problem solved?
If we have continued $1,000 fees, I will join the rebellion and say this is a failed chain.
Okay, so how then are you going to bring down transaction fees on the main chain? So
you will have to make the blocks bigger. If the fees go up than the current 20 cents to $1, you have to make the blocks bigger long term.
Okay, now I'm afraid that's a very big concession, David.
Well, so I think that's not a radical position. I think this is a majority position that at some point the blocks have to be bigger.
How much bigger though? So maybe this is where we're going to find disagreement.
Well, I think my main point is the blocks should be full.
Okay, no.
Well, whatever size they should be full.
When the blocks get full, the fees skyrocket. If the blocks aren't full, you really don't have large.
It's always an equilibrium. The fees go up. Right,
the fees go up until. I don't know what you mean by it's an equilibrium. So there's a finite amount of space. As soon and if the space is not taken up, if the blocks aren't full, pretty much all transactions are going to get through. There's no reason. I mean, unless you have like 0
Once
cents.
the blocks are full,
then you have to
decide
people bidding against each other.
They're bidding, and then they decide how much they want to broadcast to the chain and how much they want to reduce consumption. Right? It's a scarce commodity, so there's a market dynamic.
So in other words, there are very low transaction fees until the blocks are full. So you can't simultaneously say we need to have low transaction fees on the main chain and we need to have full blocks at the same time. These are mutually exclusive.
People should, so blocks can only go to 100%. So once blocks are full, people have to make decisions about what transactions go on chain. And so my point is that there should be an equilibrium where the blocks are basically just full up, and people that would have made it to the chain instead decide to use some second layer solution.
Okay, and so in your mind, you think that we're going to have a group of developers who are going to divine equilibrium, and they're going to say, now there should be exactly 7,147 transactions. Okay, now we're going to have the block increase temporarily though, because then it could go down and then you just have empty blocks again. You can't have that, right? So we got to have the central development committee, one group of people saying, this is what the block size needs to remain at in order to get close to equilibrium versus mind you, the system in which you have no effective block size limit. You don't need any of this.
It's a technical disagreement that whether this is feasible or not. And
what is feasible? What is feasible?
To have unlimited size blocks.
Well, look into it, David. It's not that hard. It is 100% reasonable. Okay, and not only is it
why do you think you're qualified to make this technical? It's a very,
oh my gosh,
very
David. I will accept your apology in advance. All right. So after this call me out on it and see if the system is good enough where you can effectively have no block size limit. Now that doesn't mean blocks of arbitrary size, because there are beautiful incentives involved in Bitcoin. So miners run a risk if they say, hey, we have a huge mempool right now. We've got 8 gigabytes worth of transactions. I'm going to push them all out at once. Well, that's not necessarily the right call, because you run orphan risks. So the miners themselves are trying to debate what is the correct size block. There's no one academic solution. Here is the correct size block, and it should move up by this percent
If the
every
blocks
year.
are too large, the network will fracture. At some point, it has to.
Well, we have to speak very carefully. So if the blocks are too large in the short run, so if, for example, miners are expecting blocks between 10 and 100 megabytes, and then somebody tries to dump a terabyte block on there, that might cause problems. But it's not a problem from the network perspective. It's a problem from the miner perspective, because miners will get forked off the network. So miners automatically have an incentive to try to make sure they're not pushing out blocks that are too
Except
large,
you might
such
have
that the majority can't handle them.
The network itself could fork, and now you have two competing networks, which has happened with other cryptocurrencies that had large blocks.
Okay, so if you're talking about like a reorg, that happens. That's okay. And again, that is a problem for miners. It's not a problem for the network. It's a problem for miners. Miners do not want to fracture the network, because that means some blocks.
Except all transactions start failing when, like,
that's incorrect. That is theoretically incorrect, and it's factually incorrect, because it's happened multiple times on multiple blockchains, and you don't. And actually, what happens is the opposite. What happens is you have some miners that are still on the main chain. Some miners are on the orphan chain, but the transactions are still propagated on both of them. So yeah, you have
except the orphan chain is blocked at some point, right?
Yeah, the orphan chain is orphaned off. So, but
all the transactions go away.
No, the transactions they're still going to be present. They're going to be in a different order, but they're still going to be present on the main chain. This has happened multiple times. So also the net effect is not really much of a service disruption unless you're a miner, and then you lose all of your money because you produce blocks that were invalid.
Okay,
they weren't
Steve.
recognized by the main chain. Yeah.
So we can talk about this forever, but let me ask a question. What is your vision of the future of the space, of the cryptocurrencies?
What I think is going to happen, or what I like to see happen?
Well, let's say both.
Well, I would like to see people start realizing just how stunted BTC has become. Like if you dive into the history and you actually think through these concepts very deeply, think about the economics, think about the incentives, think about the technology. Don't just read the Bitcoin standard, because he's wrong about a bunch of things. Doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. I would love to see people wake up, because original Bitcoin technology, in my opinion, I might be wrong on this because I don't follow it as closely as I used to. Original Bitcoin technology looks like the best technology out there in the cryptocurrency space. You can do smart contracting. It's a little bit more complex, but I'm happy to talk about how you can do smart contracting with Bitcoin.
And by original, you mean Bitcoin just with larger blocks?
No, unfortunately. So the Bitcoin core developers have changed several parts of Bitcoin that made it significantly worse. So one is it's called replaced by fee, where you can essentially send, if your transaction is stuck in the mempool because the blocks are too small, you can send another transaction.
That is my favorite feature. I replace by fee all the time. It's great because you can use low fees and then raise it if you need to.
Yeah, so this is terrible in my opinion. It's terrible for a consumer experience. It's terrible for merchants. And also it's
terrible because you can't immediately accept transactions with no confirmations or
right. So imagine we're talking about digital money and the possibility of digital money. And somebody says, hey, I have this amazing digital money. It's cheap and effective. You can send it anywhere, except every transaction you have to wait at least 10 minutes in order to confirm. And the other person says, yeah, I have the same technology, except you can accept instant transactions. It's a no-brainer in my mind. The ability to have instant transactions is phenomenal, and it always was.
It is optional, though, right?
Right now, it is optional. Yeah. Well,
and merchants can say we don't accept.
That's correct. Yes, that might change in the future, and they've talked about changing that openly in the future. But right now, that's correct.
I'm sorry. Let's get back to the question.
Right.
How would you like to see it evolve?
So, in addition to bigger blocks, there are other bad changes that the core developers have made that restricting the amount of data that can be made and put in transactions because they have a bad idea of the relationship of data in the blockchain. I am much more so in terms of a technological standpoint. I like the BSV technology. In terms of the community, they have some problems.
BSV is just original Bitcoin,
more or less. Boy, that's
and its main cheerleader is a scammer who claims to be Satoshi.
We can have an interesting discussion about that.
Is he a scammer? Is he a fraud or not?
It depends on what you mean by the words. I think it's possible that he could have been involved or nearby. As some of my friends and I joke, he might have been around and like rummaging through the trash. He was like Satoshi's janitor. That might have been the case. I can confidently say I don't believe he was the brains behind Bitcoin, but open to the idea that he's
not the most ethical guy.
Well, that we can agree on. Yes, we can agree on the ethics.
And he's the main cheerleader of BSV.
Yeah. So interesting discussion.
Do you read? Okay, I don't follow this community that closely, but whenever I read BSV's news websites, they're full of lies.
Oh yeah, that's definitely
There's
the
no way
case.
to sugarcoat it.
Yeah, like CoinGeek. Yeah, they're like
Okay,
a propaganda
so
arm. Yeah, totally.
I mean, you can
Yeah,
be a
but I
cheerleader
should
for
but I should say
Bitcoin Cash, but
from my perspective, David, the same is true of Bitcoin. In fact, in terms of net amount of bullshit and propaganda, I would say BTC is probably like 100-fold, 1,000-fold more than BSV. Now,
there's bullshit and there's outright lies about
yeah,
like.
there are so many outright lies in BTC. I can name them off.
All right, I'm
it's
sorry.
yeah,
Let's get back on topic.
right.
What do you want to see happen in the space?
Right. So I would like to. From a technological standpoint, I think if people were to objectively look at BSV and to a lesser extent BCH, they would go, wow, this is incredible technology. Look at all the amazing things we can do with it. I would love to see that be the case. In the long run, I do think the better tech will win. I might be wrong. I have evidence to the contrary that the better tech might not win. But I do think.
Have you put your money where the mouth is?
It's none of your business.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. Now, in terms of what I think will happen, I think personally, I tend to think that we're going into a bear cycle that's going to be very extreme. And the reason I think that is because I think so as we've gone through multiple hype cycles, you got, it's like a bigger pool, a bigger pool, a bigger pool. And then Tom Brady talks about it. And then the state talks about it. Wow, it just keeps growing in the hype. And I'm thinking, okay, at this point, what is the greater sphere that the hype around Bitcoin can go into? It's like, we've got nation state involvement. We've got all the influencers, it's advertisements everywhere. I just don't think, I might totally be wrong about this. I don't think we're going to have another 10x, 100x in Bitcoin, maybe ever. Now, I also think there are massive technological limitations that are all artificial that were put on Bitcoin that are going to make it in the long run very unattractive compared to other cryptocurrencies. So I think a plausible future is one in which the religion won't die. I think the BTC is a religion, and there's so much misinformation and nonsense around it. I don't think it's going anywhere for anytime soon. It might hang around its price level, I don't know, within an order of magnitude, something like that. But in terms of the future of cryptocurrency, I don't think I would be flabbergasted if it's BTC. The Lightning Network has fundamental problems. We only touched on the problem of the high on-chain transaction cost breaking the Lightning Network, but there's other massive problems, capacity problems. You can't route payments that are more than $100 without a high failure rate. There's all kinds of fundamental problems with Lightning. So I don't think the future is BTC. That much I can say with some level of confidence.
Here's what I don't get. There's like 20,000 cryptos, and it's such a competitive market phenomenon that to say that this one technology is succeeding because of lies long term seems implausible.
I don't know. I don't know if that's good. So imagine the story I've just told is correct. Like maybe let's just say, for hypothetically, my understanding of Bitcoin from a system standpoint and a technological standpoint is correct. Then in fact, it had all this ability and it was in fact hijacked. I could make a pretty strong case for that, and I'm in the process of doing so. If that's true, it certainly means that narrative power is substantial. And I think the recent events of the past few years have pushed me more into the camp of thinking, oh man, narrative is almost everything right now. Like people make their investment decisions. They think they know what they're talking about. They think they're escaping the state by buying Bitcoin.
This is why we have religions and governments, because they each have a narrative that's very powerful.
Something like that. And, if you have people who are miseducated for a very long period of time, it is hard to correct a lot of that miseducation. So I would say like a very compelling explanation for the relative success, the short-term success of BTC in terms of price can be entirely explained by narrative. And especially like there's a lot of evidence, right? Because you have otherwise prominent people who are speaking very confidently about how awesome Bitcoin is. They don't know what they're talking about. Factually speaking, they don't know how the system works. So that tells me, okay, facts aren't really the thing that's mattering right now. I also think I should say the inflation from the Fed might have really helped Bitcoin because the narrative is so strong with the digital gold analogy, an analogy I used to like before it turned kind of crazy. That is a very strong hook, digital gold. So I think the fact that we've seen so much inflation of late is something that's also kept Bitcoin prices higher than they otherwise would be.
Okay, so what is the future? Which I want to ask you where you put your money, but where should somebody that wants to preserve their wealth put their money?
I mean, that's not my business. I can't do that. All I can say with confidence is people are deeply confused about how Bitcoin works, how it was originally designed to work, the history of Bitcoin, and they haven't thought through the system very carefully. So buyer beware. If it's the case that what I'm saying is correct, buyer beware. Now,
what do you think is more likely, that Bitcoin will evolve or that some other crypto will take its place?
The latter. Yeah, so in my opinion, we haven't talked about this, but I'd love to. An interesting subject. I think Bitcoin was actually hijacked. So there's the eternal question, right? Are we talking incompetence versus malice? Like, that is the eternal question. And I have seen a lot of evidence lately, in particular, that it's malice, or it's a mixture, of course, as it always is. But I think there's malice involved, and so I don't think BTC is going to be upgrading in any meaningful way. I don't think BTC right now poses any threat to the state whatsoever. All of the on-roads and off-roads are totally captured. Centralized exchanges with KYC. It's like it's a captured system, and it doesn't threaten the state. So I don't think that dimension is going to change. So I think if cryptocurrencies are going to have any positive effect on freedom, it's not going to be BTC.
What's going to be the killer app of cryptocurrencies? What major problem are they actually going to solve?
Right now, I think micropayments is a big one. I think that's one area where you still have unique technology. And like, if people are not familiar with what you can do with micropayments, you have to hold your nose and research what's happening in the BSV ecosystem, because there's some really cool stuff that's being built on it that simply literally can't be built with other technologies.
Do you even need a decentralized platform for micropayments? Can't you just do that? Like, can't Square come out with a product where through Square you micropay a bunch of merchants?
It's possible. It doesn't exist. So just like online payments were made easier with Bitcoin, and then the legacy industry sort of caught up. So it's a lot better with Venmo, like you were saying. Same thing could theoretically happen with micropayments.
It just doesn't seem like something that you need a blockchain for, or a decentralized network for. You could easily centralize that. And nothing big would be lost by doing that.
Yeah, so I think one of the benefits that would come from that is, if as it used to be before blocks became full and the system was captured, there was so much momentum of people actually using the underlying technology. Then it had a chance to become a real currency, like a currency that we would use. I used it many times way back in the day. I would go to a store and you would buy stuff with crypto, and it was great. It was a good user experience back in the day. So I think if we're going to, if Bitcoin is if cryptocurrencies are ever going to be money, at some point they're going to have to be used as a medium of exchange. And if their first usage is, micropayments or whatever, I think that's great. The more actual real world usages, the better. The closer we get to more freedom from having cryptocurrencies.
So if you're a cypherpunk and your goal is to reduce the role of the state and create this market outside the state's control, your vision is that instead of focusing on crypto as savings, we should focus on crypto as a medium of daily exchange.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the idea of crypto as savings right now is putting the cart before the horse. So I don't think economically it makes sense that you're going to have people just buying a thing as a supposed store of value, and then maybe you won't be able to use it in commerce. I don't think historically or theoretically that makes sense.
You think the use in commerce is what gives a cryptocurrency its value?
In the long run, I don't know if I'd say it gives it its value, because there are other uses as well. I think it still remains the strongest value proposition of cryptocurrency. Yeah.
Understood. All right. Well, we can talk, I feel like, for hours.
I think we could. Yes.
I think we do have to wrap it up. Any recommendations that you have for people to learn more about this debate?
So I wish I did. So this is part of the reason I'm writing a book on this topic right now. But it's probably not going to be out until next year, sometime. I don't know when. When that comes out, well, I'd be happy to come back on your show and talk about it in more detail, and then I can give somebody a specific reference to it.
All right, sounds good. And in the meantime, your website is, what is it?
It's Patterson? steve-patterson.com is my website. I do a bunch of philosophy stuff, the occasional Bitcoin commentary.
Understood. All right, Steve, I really appreciate it. Thanks for being on with me today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
All right. Thanks.